Hi, I'm John DeVore. Welcome to the channel. Today's not going to be a record review or anything like that. It is going to be a little bit of an explanation for maybe why I haven't been doing as many videos as usual. And that is because over the past year or so, I have been busier than I have ever been in my life. And so I wanted to just talk a little bit about what's going on here at DeVore Fidelity. And I know that's also a little unusual. I have really tried to keep DeVore Fidelity, the speaker company, kind of separate from these videos. I wanted these videos to be more about music and having fun with records and just, talking about hobbies maybe. Some explainer videos on how some of the shit works. But I thought today I would talk a little bit about some of the stuff that is going on here at DeVore Fidelity. And I certainly don't want to make this sound anything like a sales pitch or anything like that, other than to sort of talk about the development and why these things are kind of coming forward now. So for DeVore Fidelity proper, there are several new speaker models coming out all this year. And that is crazy for DeVore Fidelity. Anyone who has followed the company, my company, at all over the past 20 years or so knows that new models are sparse. They take years to develop. They don't just pop out regularly. And when a new model comes out, it tends to stay in the product line unchanged for many years. So 3 new speaker models coming out this year, all in 1 year, which is kind of remarkable. One of them, I gave myself a deadline because it is the 20th, and it is all about the 20th anniversary of DeVore Fidelity. So DeVore Fidelity technically started in 2000, but we didn't start selling speakers until 2001. So this is our 20th anniversary year. And in order to celebrate that, I decided that I wanted to make sort of a commemorative version of what has been our most popular speaker of all time, and that's our Orangutan O96, which is a high sensitivity two-way speaker. It is actually on a stand, but it is really sort of a floor standing speaker of medium dimensions. A couple of years ago, DeVore Fidelity released the O reference, which was an insane project that I may do a video on at some point, just because of there's so many elements that went into working on the O reference. But I don't want to go into them right now. But many of those elements I intended to trickle down into more affordable products. And one in particular, which I did do a video on, was the cast and machined bronze parts. The super tweeter, the tweeter, and the woofer chassis and horns were all cast in Indiana, cast out of a bronze alloy and then machined to precision and built into our drivers. So those were the things that I first was going to trickle down into a new product. So the 20th anniversary coming up gave me the idea that I would do a limited production, limited edition, completely build to order. Only 20 pairs will ever be made. Each one will be individually numbered, and the badges are already done. So these beautiful little bronze badges, all individually numbered, these beautiful little engraved bronze badges. So every pair will have its own number. Every pair will be built with the veneers and the tints and the hardwood stands of that customer's choice. And those speakers are incorporating the tweeter that we designed for the O reference, so that includes not just the tweeter, but includes the bronze casting and machining of the horn. We are built a new woofer based on the O96 woofer, but with significant parts lifted from the O reference woofer. So the bronze chassis again, we're experimenting with the bronze phase plug and a few other little details, bronze ports on the back as well. So those were announced a little over a month ago. They are completely sold out. Thank you to the absolute finest dealer network any hi-fi company has ever had. Thank you so much, guys, for backing me up with this project. And we expect to get those built starting in the beginning of 2022. The other two speakers that are coming out this year are very closely related, and they are also orangutan models. One is the O Baby, and the other is its little sibling, the micro. The O Baby is very much a miniaturized O96, so it also has a stand. The cabinet itself is half the volume, almost exactly half the volume, so it's considerably smaller in scale. It uses it's a smaller tweeter, it's a smaller woofer, and it was designed to be basically as inexpensive, as cost effective an O model as I could possibly make that still has a real fair measure, a recognizable DeVore Fidelity orangutan sound signature. So that's the O Baby. The idea of a more affordable orangutan model has been something in the back of my mind since the first orangutan model, the O96, since it came out 8 years ago or so, 9 maybe. Because it's an obvious one, and because a lot of customers and dealers have been asking me for something like that. But in the first round, when I made the O96 and then the O93 following it, I had experimented with smaller orangutan drivers, and none of them really were able to communicate that same orangutan-ness sonically that the 10-inch drivers that are in those original models have. Then about 2 years ago, a little over 2 years, 3 years ago now, significantly pre-COVID shutdown, one of my employees approached me and said she had a complaint. And her complaint was that she was in a widely recognized, well-known speaker company, and the sound out in the assembly area of the factory, which is where she worked primarily, was horrible. And she was right. The sound out there was mostly coming from what we have. We have a big thing called the burn-in rig, and it's a big system of metal shelving and a 12-channel amplifier. And we have components. We have drivers and crossovers and various components, prototype drivers, packages of O96 or Gibbon 10 drivers and crossovers laid out to burn in. And we do that to burn in demo models for dealers. We like to burn in our speakers before we would send them to a reviewer. And as I was saying, she was completely correct, because all those drivers not in enclosures with all kinds of phasey cancellations and things like that, it really just sort of sounds thin and nasty, and it sounds terrible. And I laughed and I agreed, and I said there's no reason why employees of DeVore Fidelity should have to listen to this sort of shrill thing. So I threw together a funny little, basically it was a 1 foot cube with a coaxial driver on it. Threw them up there, and they sounded great, and it filled out the weird sound coming from the burn-in rig, because you always had at least one pair of speakers there that were fully tuned, they were in their enclosures, that were reproducing a certain amount of bass, and were properly set up for that kind of a situation. And then for my son's birthday about a year ago, I built him a pair of little cubes based on the little 3XL driver. And then of course it occurred to me that maybe this would be a fun product to put out there. So I started prototyping little coax 7-inch drivers, some full range 7-inch and 8-inch drivers that had whizzer cones on them. Some of these really did sort of come pretty far along in the evolution. And then one of the prototype drivers, one of the 6.5-inch, 7-inch drivers, really stuck out as having an enormous amount of potential. It had a great mid-range. It really had a lot of character to it that I liked, a lot of sort of orangutan type character, which sounds really ridiculous if you don't know anything about our speaker line, but for those of you who do, I guess that makes some sense. And on paper I realized it would work beautifully, not just in a little cube, a sealed cube that you could put in a shelf, but also in a little bit bigger. Essentially it would work beautifully in a cabinet that would be a half-scale version of the O96. So a ported cabinet that had half the volume of the O96 looked like on paper it would have a lot of potential. And so we prototyped it, we built it, I loved it, and that developed into what is the O Baby. And the O Micro developed into our little cube. This adorable little thing. So this is now, it has morphed down to a 10-inch cube. So this is a little cube, 10 inches on a side, but it has the O Baby tweeter, woofer, a very similar crossover, and it is tuned essentially to work in a bookshelf. I've tested these in record shelves because the 10-inch cube lends itself perfectly to that, and it's a really very happy with it. And you'd think that that would be enough to keep me really, really busy these days, but it's not. The other project that I've been working on is related very closely to DeVore Fidelity, but will actually be separate from DeVore Fidelity. I am starting a second company, and that is going to be an amplifier company. So the backstory of this, which there's an article that I'll link to below. There's an article about the amplifier company, and there's an article actually about the new orangutan models. So I'll link to those articles below. But essentially the backstory is an old friend of mine who I've known since the 90s. He's in the hi-fi industry. And one of the very first hi-fi shows I ever exhibited at, I used one of his amplifiers. And he's a guy who has long really sort of been revered in the underground vacuum tube amp community. His name is Noriasu Komoro. And as I said, I met him in the 90s. He worked at the legendary Fi, which was a hi-fi store run by Don Garber, and who also employed J.C. Morrison, who now works for Silbatone, building unbelievable, mind-boggling circuits for them, tube circuits for them. Herb Reichert, who now writes for Stereophile magazine, worked at Fi building amplifiers. Gordon Rankin sold amps through there. It was the very first sapling of the rebirth of relatively uncomplicated, relatively low power tube amplifiers in the US. And the roots of that sapling came via Japan from the original wave of high-end audio in the US. And we're talking about going back to the teens, the 20s, the 30s, and the 40s. Western Electric, RCA, amplifiers like that. Really beautiful, low-powered amplifiers that the mystique and the reverence of which was kept alive in Japan when it was essentially forgotten in the US until the 90s started to bring it back. And then brands like Gordon Rankin's Wavelength, Don Garber's Fi, Dennis Had with Carry Audio, Japanese brands like Airtight, Audio Note, and Kondo, Shindo, and these are all the brands that sort of kept alive and helped gain traction in that market in the US. Anyway, Komuro was a big player back then, and in the opinion of a lot of people who really know, his circuits were the very best, and they really are really amazing amplifiers. Komuro, over the 90s and the early 2000s, built amplifiers on commission, but he was not very efficient. He estimates there are fewer than a dozen, maybe even fewer than 10 Komuro amplifiers out there in the world in total. However many of those survive, I'm not even sure. They very rarely come up on the used market. Anyway, he sort of drifted out of the high-end audio world and works as an electrician, works for contractors and things like that. Meanwhile, I started a speaker company and never really left the high-end audio world. And in 2020, high-end audio speakers, at least speakers from DeVore Fidelity, sales stopped. During the pandemic shutdown, our sales stopped. They essentially became zero for over a month and only just started tapering in after a couple of months. And it was really a scary time. Anyway, during that time when speakers were not selling, not only did I start this YouTube channel, but it also occurred to me that I needed to diversify to some extent. And I thought about it and I thought, well, I'm not going to do a different speaker line because that's not diversifying. I thought maybe I needed to start a different hi-fi product because I wanted to continue working in hi-fi. It's my passion. It's what I really want to do. I love what I do every day. And it occurred to me that my friend Komuro really never earned a living off of his magnificent amplifiers. And that now that he wasn't building them on consignment anymore, that if nothing was done, his amplifiers would be relegated to the dustbin of history, and they would gradually become obscure and unknown. And I thought that that would be kind of shitty, because his amplifiers are truly great. His circuit is brilliant. And so I approached him with this idea that I would start the Komuro Amplifier Company. I bought 3 of his designs, and he will also get a percentage of every sale. And so in this way, I have diversified. I've got a product that if speaker sales globally tank, maybe exotic tube amplifiers will continue to keep the lights on here. And my friend Komuro will get the recognition that I believe he deserves, and will finally be able to start receiving checks for these great designs. So that is a really sort of a long-winded walk through all of the crazy stuff that's going on in my life right now. It's why I barely even realized that Inktober has started again. The Inktober was something that I did last year and I absolutely loved. I did these sort of daily fountain pen drawings based on a list of prompts, a daily list of prompts, and every day you have to make a new drawing, and it was absolutely great. And I'm going to do it this month, but I'm not going to be able to do it every day. So I will be, oh, this is one of my Inktober drawings from last year. But I am going to do the full 31 drawings. It may take me 2 or 3 days for each of the daily drawings, but I'm still going to do them. So thank you for watching. I don't know how many of you would think that this is an interesting video, but hopefully some of you do. And I will see you at the next video.